Just now got to clinic, trying to get some work done here on a Sunday. Here we go. Hi everyone, my name is Brad and I vlog under the name Investing Doc. Welcome to my channel, and today we're going to talk about how I got into my top choice residency and medical school. And not only did I do that, but I got scholarships to attend these schools to help me graduate with only $150,000 in student loans, which I know sounds like a lot of money, but most individuals nowadays are getting close to $250,000 or more in student loan debt. So it's definitely beneficial to graduate with a little bit less money. I paid it off actually in 1.5 years. If you're curious how I did it, click on my other video below on how I paid off $150,000 in debt in 1.5 years. One of the top reasons people don't get into medical school is definitely grades. So put all of your attention on that. If you have not the best grades, some people will then try to make up for that by doing a lot of extracurricular activities. In my opinion, that's the wrong way to go about it. If you have a 2.5 GPA, the fact that you've done 8 poster presentations doesn't make up for that low GPA. You've got to have the grades. So if you need tutors, study hard, get the good grades, and know that the average GPA is not a 4.0. In some schools, it's around 3.5, 3.6, and keep in mind that's the average. So for every 4.0, you may have a 3.2 that got in. And remember, once you get the MD or DO, doesn't matter. I've been practicing now for 4 years after residency, and not a single person has ever asked why I went to medical school or residency. So once you graduate, life is good. Don't worry about it. But for the meantime, study hard and try hard to do well in school. I started as a hospitalist. That's how I paid off all my debt so quickly. Loved the job, got burnt out a little bit, and decided to start up my own primary care clinic just because I wanted to be in control of my own destiny. And although it's fun doing locum shifts, traveling quite a bit, it gets a little bit old being on the road 24/7. Absolutely love primary care, wouldn't trade it, and I actually wish I would have done it sooner. So like I said, I am from Texas. Luckily, Texas has a lot of less expensive medical schools. That's how I graduated with only $150,000 in student loans. The reason I got all these scholarships was that I used it as a part-time job. I basically went and applied to all of these scholarships, probably well over 1,000 scholarships, as a part-time job while I was in college. And even in medical school, I started applying to scholarship after scholarship. While in medical school, I had tens of thousands of dollars that I was able to get in scholarships. And I think the biggest thing for that was, and the best thing I could say is, don't be afraid to put something unique on your application. I came from a small town. I have no physicians in the family, and I was from a business background. Everyone owns businesses. Nobody went into medicine. So I was the first one to do that in my family. I think it stood out a little bit on my applications to put something unique in there, saying not only am I from a town of 2,000 people, not only am I the first one to go to medical school or want to be a physician in my family, but there were some other interesting things in my application. For example, I really like to brew beer. And not only did I do it, I did it competitively and won a couple of tournaments brewing my beer. So I think that made me stick out. So when I applied to medical school and applied to residency, every single place I went to said, hey, oh, you're that guy who brews beer and did it competitively. And then I could talk about it and say, well, it's actually a lot more detailed than you think. I'm very detail oriented, very focused on the goal. It takes up to 8 hours to brew an entire batch. There's actually a lot of science behind it where I get into water chemistry. So I think doing and focusing on that rather than the drinking aspect of it was something that people actually liked and made me stand out whenever I applied to all these programs. Now, on the lines of test scores, let's talk a little bit about how to get good test scores. First thing is, learn how to take a test. I don't want to get too much in the nitty-gritty of it, but when I was in high school, no one ever taught me how to take a test. The best thing you can do to start out taking a test is eliminate the answers right away. So if it's a 5-point multiple choice question, if you can eliminate 3 of those, you have it down to a 50-50 shot of getting the question right. So the first thing I always did whenever I read the question, if I knew the answer right away, I would look for it. If I didn't, I would go through, read them, and eliminate the wrong choices right away. Then from there, I did take a prep class for the MCAT. The very first time I took it, I ended up scoring a 34 on the MCAT. That was when it was scored out of a 45. And it was a pretty good score. So not only did I have that, I had pretty good grades. I didn't have a 4.0, but I think because of my background and the uniqueness of my application, I think it resonated well with administrators and medical schools. And I was able to basically get an interview at pretty much every medical school that I applied to. I can't think of a single one where I didn't get an interview to. So once you're in, it's definitely not as difficult once you're into medical school the rest of the way, because that interview for medical school, you definitely want them a lot more than they want you. There's tens of thousands of people applying to medical school, and it's just a numbers game. They have a lot more applications and a lot more chances to pick someone else over you. So that is, in my opinion, the hardest hurdle to get over. Once you're into medical school, choosing a residency somewhat determines on where you go. For example, let's say you wanted to go into plastic surgery. Well, there's some very small programs that are not as well known as sending their residents or their medical students to a residency for integrated plastic surgery programs or neurosurgery. That may make it a little bit more difficult, so the medical school to some degree matters. But if you want to be a general radiologist or primary care doctor or internal medicine doctor, that matters a little bit less. Some of the do's that I would like to highlight for interviewing for either medical school or residency. First thing is dress professional. I know this may sound cavalier, but you'd be surprised on how many interviews I went to for medical school or residency where someone was not dressed appropriately, meaning they were wearing tennis shoes. One time someone, kid you not, showed up in flip-flops to one of the interviews for residency, claimed that their baggage got lost, but that's all they had. You know, should have been a little bit more prepared and maybe went somewhere and bought some kind of shoes. It would have been better than flip-flops. So I would encourage you to dress professionally. The other thing is be prepared, especially for residency. If you're interviewing for a competitive spot, integrated plastic surgery, neurosurgeon, any of those types of things, there's usually not that many individuals with that department you want to interview with. And whenever you get to your interview day, you have an itinerary that you're given that shows you you're going to be interviewing with these individuals later today. At a restroom break or one of the breaks during the day, just do a quick Google search, figure out broad questions. Are they an oncologist, hematologist? What have they done? Are they specializing in something that you can talk about? And you don't want to talk the conversation about them, but just know your audience and know that if you did research in oncology, for example, as a medical student, they're probably going to pair you with an oncologist. So be prepared to answer some difficult questions. You don't have to know exactly everything, but if you don't know the basics of whatever you're going in and talking about, that's definitely going to sink the interview for you. The next thing is, like I talked about earlier, I'd put something unique on the application. I put on my application that I brewed beer, and one of the interviews at my top choice residency, that's actually almost all we talked about. But not only did we just talk about brewing beer, we talked about the science behind brewing beer. Everybody was like, oh, you're the guy who homebrews. Tell me more about that. I heard you won quite a few competitions. And it actually was a huge positive for me. One of my friends put on there that he was a bodybuilder and he won several amateur bodybuilding contests. And to him, that also showed dedication and something that he was willing to do outside of medicine. So the don'ts, and these may sound kind of funny, but don't cuss during the interview. Throughout the entire interview day, you're almost certainly going to be watched from start to finish. There are times that I have heard individuals who were being interviewed who were walking to the cafeteria with some of the residents, or some of the administrators may have been in the elevator with them, where they were throwing out cuss words. It's not a good look for you. So just keep in mind that you're probably going to be watched from start to finish of the interview day. So don't cuss, act professional, and treat everyone with respect that you meet along the way, because you're definitely not going to get in if they find out that you were rude to the front staff and secretary, because that shows a lot about who you are. So absolutely do not cuss and treat everyone with respect that you meet during the day. The next one is do not show up late. There are lots of individuals who show up late or barely right on time for their interviews or interview day. Make sure you give yourself ample amount of time, even do a dry run the night before, but just do not show up late. If you do, it better be a very good excuse for why you're showing up late. This one may seem obvious, but avoid misspellings in your application. There are lots of individuals who think that they proofread their application, sent it in. I read a lot of applications whenever I was in medical school and residency for individuals who were trying to get into either medical school or residency, and there were tons of misspellings in those paragraphs about themselves or their research, and it's just not a good look if you can't spell things correctly when you have a lot of time to prepare this one important application. The other thing to make sure you don't do, don't bomb the interview. Easier said than done, but if you need to take an interview class or you need to practice interviewing ahead of time, you absolutely should. Record yourself, think about questions that may be asked to you, and I'll post some questions on my website that are frequently asked, but do not bomb the interview. Make it fun, make it conversation. The next point I'd like to make is probably easier said than done, but remember that this is all a journey and have fun along the way. You can tell right away those individuals who are having fun with it and not having fun, and not making a joke having fun out of it, but just loving life, loving where they're at. Those individuals are usually a lot more fun to be around than someone who is very, very uptight or comes off with a very aggressive or negative demeanor. So if you're happy, you're likely to have other happy people around you, and you want the interviewers and that entire day to leave happy, just like you're leaving happy. So absolutely be prepared for the interview and be happy for the interview. The last thing is, don't be afraid to reach out to schools. When I applied to medical schools, I gave them a couple of months, and if I didn't hear from a school that I was very interested in, about halfway through the application process, I actually reached out to them and I said, hey, I'm very interested in interviewing with you. Maybe a long shot, but would you mind giving me an interview? And I wouldn't necessarily say it that way. I would say, I'm very interested in the school. I think I would be a great asset to your school. Could you give me the program director's email, or how can I get in touch with someone to talk about, if my application could get a second look, if it's already been looked at, or if not, how or where my application stands. When I got into my top choice residency, I actually didn't even get an interview from the residency until December, which is a long way in. The only reason I got an interview from them is I actually emailed them saying, hey, I've heard from a lot of other schools and I would love to hear from you guys. These are all the reasons I love your program, and I would love to actually come and tour the program to see if everything that I've heard about the program is true, because I think I could be a great fit for the program. And I kept it short and sweet. I believe it was literally 4 or 5 sentences. I sent that to the program director there, and within 12 hours I had an invite to join them for an interview day. So don't be afraid to reach out to them. I wouldn't reach out right away, but you absolutely can reach out to them. After, I would say, a couple of months has passed, if you haven't heard from them, definitely email them. I think that's fair game.